and welcome to another one of Kilroy's Deep Dives. This is a little bit of a different deep dive in that I'm doing a deep dive on different perspectives of the American Civil War. Normally, my deep dives kind of do the old take the 100,000 foot view and then start burrowing down till you get down to the individual level or the inches above the ground level view. So I'm not really covering scale here as much as perspective. These are all games that have a different perspective, a different look, a different vantage point on the American Civil War. Some of these are a lead up to the American Civil War. Some of these are a kind of a causation or causal effect on the Civil War. And some of these are just a different take on the American Civil War from like a different vantage point. And this concept came to me as I was putting out content this week that really all started honing in on the American Civil War. The kind of had a theme. I like to do theme weeks, and this week is the American Civil War. And I was covering the game Profiteers, which is right up over there, and which is a very different look at the American Civil War. And that gave me the inspiration to do a deep dive. So here I go with my deep dive on a different perspective of the American Civil War. First up is Freedom, the Underground Railroad. So why is this part of a perspective of the American Civil War? Well, if I have to explain that to you, then I don't know what else I can do for you. Slavery was a very prominent issue leading to the American Civil War. I'm not going to get into a political debate on on slavery. I don't think that's the need to be explained, especially not on this channel. But Freedom, the Underground Railroad is a very unique game, very controversial in some sectors and some aspects, in that you are recreating the Underground Railroad, and basically it's a cooperative game where you are working to get slaves from the South to the North, and you're trying to get them along these different paths, and the game is working against you. The game is basically, the AI is slave catchers, and they are trying to foil your attempts to free slaves via the Underground Railroad and getting them to the North. So, as you can expect, there is this is a tough topic, a tough one to game. It kind of falls into the whole category of should you make a game out of serious and controversial topics. I'm kind of the school of because I learn from games. That's one reason why I play war games, is to learn from history, to better understand history, to better understand what, especially from a military perspective, what were the choices, what were the factors that led to the decisions that led to the outcome of certain conflicts. Was it terrain? Was it command? Was it weapons? Was it morale? That's one reason why I play war games, is to learn. It's probably the primary reason why I play war games, is to learn history and to learn it in a tactile sense. You can read books, you can watch movies, and you can play games. And the game aspect has a touch and feel that really helps my understanding and helps my enjoyment of learning history. And so you might say, well, how can you enjoy history when you're talking about slavery and the slave trade and slave hunters trying to track them down? I still think you can learn from that. This is an aspect of history we don't talk about much. We don't. It's not read about much. I mean, you might hear about Harriet Tubman, and that's about it, right? That is all. You can check that box and say, yeah, I know a little bit about the Underground Railroad. Well, this dives into it. There's history in this. There are cards that have text, and there's some background information that goes into it. Academy Games, which is the publisher of this, does a really good job of trying to provide context and history. And there's a game in here to boot. I mean, this is a tough one. This is, again, you're working against the game. It's cooperative. You do not have to play the slavers or the slave hunters. You can play this fully cooperative and actually even solo this and try to beat the game. And so and since this is kind of a precursor to the American Civil War, I thought it was a good place to start that has a different perspective where you can learn about the American Civil War and some different aspects other than just, pure battles and campaigns. And so that is Freedom, the Underground Railroad. Next up on our journey is Bleeding Kansas. Now, this is closer to a war game, but not quite. I mean, it's done by a war game designer, John Poniski, but of course, John, if you've played a lot of his games, he doesn't do a typical war game. At least most of the games I played of his are not typical in any fashion. He always has a different perspective and a different viewpoint, which is good for this deep dive because this is all about different perspectives, and it's also something that is near and dear to my heart because my whole channel is really about different perspectives on war games. And so this is Bleeding Kansas, published by Decision Games, and is really about the Kansas-Nebraska Act, taking Kansas into statehood. And at its heart, it is kind of a cube pusher. I mean, most of your units are cubes here, but you're really dealing with the conflict, the political nature, and the settlement of Kansas. So you're going to have settlers kind of moving west and filling up some of these areas. It has somewhat of an area control aspect to the game. But you also have this election tract over here, the political tract, because what you're trying to do is you're getting Kansas to statehood. So you have a kind of whole political element to it. And you have quite a bit of conflict. And the conflict, a lot of it centers on the border wars between Kansas and Missouri. So another topic that is near to my heart. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and grew up there and have spent most of my life crisscrossing the Kansas-Missouri border. I'm back on the Missouri side now, but I spent 20 years in Kansas between Wichita and Lawrence, of course, and Topeka, working in Topeka. And Lawrence, of course, was the site of Quantrell's raid, who was a Confederate sympathizer who came into Kansas to do several raids across the border. In fact, I've done a raid or did a piece on Baxter Springs, where Quantrell did an attack down here south, next in my neck of the woods here near Joplin. So there is conflict in this game. There is moving cubes across the board. It's a little bit of a cube pusher, and there's some political aspects as well. There's a nice history book in this. Again, just like with Freedom, the Underground Railroad, there's quite a bit of historical context that is brought to bear in this game as well to make it. And then that's, of course, a very famous picture of John Brown there. That's actually in the Topeka Capitol building. So, and there's also cards in this game as well. So, this is a interesting perspective on, because this really is kind of the beginning of some of the kind of the tip of the spear in some respects of the American Civil War. The conflicts that were brewing here, and of course the impetus for John Brown to kind of go take his mission further east, kind of starts here. This is kind of a little bit of a genesis of a lot of those movements and the free states, and and of course Kansas was a free state. And there's a lot of places in Kansas, in Lawrence, Kansas, where all my kids were born. Free State Brewery, and Free State High School, and everything's a free state. So anyway, so I thought this was a appropriate next point on our deep dive into different perspectives on the American Civil War. This is Bleeding Kansas from Decision Games, designed by John Poniski. Keeping with a chronological order of sorts, next up is Fort Sumpter, the Succession Crisis, 1860 to 1861. This is a game designed by Mark Herman and published by GMT Games. This is a card-driven game. You know, cards are the heart of this game, and playing different cards to basically place little meeples or cubes, I guess I should say. There's a meeple there to track some things, but there are cubes here. Another cube pusher, right? In these different areas. So it's kind of an area or majority control type game. This is dealing with the succession crisis. So we're coming up right to the beginning of the American Civil War. So this is trying to simulate at a very abstract level, you know, the military and political and regional biases between, you know, the secessionists and the unionists, and it has kind of a tug of war aspect of as far as the winning conditions, but you are trying to get cubes in certain areas and play cards that give you benefits, and if you have certain majorities you get even more benefits in here. And it's not a very complicated game at all. The rule book is relatively thin, and it's very replayable because it doesn't have like a set outcome here. It's a two-player game, and plays relatively quickly, and in my opinion is very interesting. And as you're going to see a constant theme among the games that I'm covering in this deep dive, you know, it has a playbook, which is typical for GMT games, but it also has quite a bit of history in here, because each of the cards has a reference to some historical event or figure and talks a little bit about that history. Plus there, you know, here's a very short history of the succession crisis. So again, we're following right up to the Civil War, and this is kind of the opening act, so to speak. This is kind of setting the stage before the shots are fired, or some of the first shots are fired at Fort Sumpter. So this is Fort Sumpter, Fort Sumpter, the Succession Crisis, 1860 to 1861, a game designed by Mark Herman and published by GMT Games. Okay, shots have been fired at Fort Sumpter, and now we are into the Civil War proper, the American Civil War proper, which brings us to border states. This is a two-player game that is produced by Shakos Games, and I did an unboxing of this, so I'll do a link to that in the description. I'll link any of the games that I've covered previously. I'll put links in the description if you want to take another look at what I've said about it, or what others have said, because this is really kind of a jumping off point. But border states is just that. You are vying over battling for kind of political influence and control of the border states of Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. And it's a two-player game, one side taking the north, the other side taking the south. And you kind of have this tug of war here, where you're going to be trying to move control or influence of each of those states over to your side, and the one who has more of those states at the end wins the game. And how are you doing that? Well, you're doing that by you kind of placing leaders and units of some sort. Here's the leaders, and they have blocks here. So you got blocks, you've got tug of war, you got some cubes, you've got wooden bits. Here's a bag with cubes in it. This has got all kinds of good Euro-y goodness in it. But the main way that you win the tug of war is through historic battles. So you have these historic battles here that you'll put down here underneath here, and so this is where you can place your leader units, or these block units. You'll be placing these, and some of these have extra places to put blocks. Some of them don't have any extra places, but it's all, Fort Donelson, Stone River, Shiloh, Chattanooga, Vicksburg. It has all your, usual suspects when it comes to famous battles or critical battles or decisive battles of the American Civil War. So you're fighting at a tactical level here, these battles, which allow you to win or lose on this tug of war chart, which is going to be ultimately how you win the game. You also have leaders in the game that do special abilities and kind of reassign people, or do have special abilities or features. You have Lincoln and Jefferson Davis for the ultimate leaders on each side. And then some of the other key people, not necessarily leaders, but key influencers of that time period. So that's the next up as far as having a different perspective, very abstract, but yet very playable in a very short period of time, and that is Border States from Shakos Games. Now we're to the game that inspired this entire deep dive. That is Profiteers, a game from James Dickinson, and published by Stronghold Games. Now, I'll put a link to this because I just did an unboxing of this just this week. So take a look at that link if you want to see what all the contents are of this. But basically, this is an economic game. You're going to be playing one of these British companies that are trying to profit, hence the name Profiteers, on the American Civil War. So there's going to be a series of these battles. Again, this to me is somewhat reminiscent to the Border States game. You have some of these famous battles, Bull Run, Antietam, Fredericksburg, and what have you. And each side is going to be, buying bonds, and you have Confederate bonds, Union bonds. You've got Confederate troops, Union troops, or resources, and these companies here are arming the sides. They're arming the South or the North, and they are trying to profit upon the Civil War, and it's almost like a hedging your bets on who's going to win the war. And if your side, if one side wins a certain number of battles, then you win, and if it's a tie, then you're just going to add up whatever income that your company made, and whoever has the most income wins the game. So it very much is an economic game. It's a little bit of it's a kind of a perverse stock market game of sorts, in that you're kind of betting on either the North or the South, and getting them ammunitions and resources and weapons and the like. You're kind of arming their or supplying their war effort. And that's how you're trying to win the game. And it's gone over a series of the battles that were done historically. So definitely a very different perspective on the American Civil War, and done from an economic viewpoint, an outside economic viewpoint. And that is Profiteers from Stronghold Games. So far, we've covered some social aspects, some political aspects, some economic aspects and perspectives of the American Civil War. How about some more warlike aspects of the American Civil War? This is a war game channel, isn't it? Which brings me to Rebel Raiders on the High Seas. This is a game designed by Mark McLaughlin, and published by GMT Games. And again, I bought this used and did an unboxing of this, so I'll put a link to that down below. But this definitely is a unique perspective on the American Civil War, in that this is from the aspect of naval and naval combat. That is really the driver in this game. Now, there are still land engagements. Of course, they're very important in the American Civil War, and that's all taking place here. But as you can see, there's not a lot of boxes, there's not a lot of hexes, there's not a lot of area to influence here on the land side of things. A lot of what is going on and where you're spending your time is is at sea. You're dealing with blockades. If you're the Union, you're dealing with blockades, and you're dealing with battles related to that endeavor. If you're the South, you're trying to break out of some of those blockades. You're trying to get much needed supply and resources. And this game, all that activity will affect what's going on here in the hinterland. However, this game really is putting an emphasis on the naval aspect of the American Civil War. So definitely a different perspective, an interesting game. And you can link this up with another GMT game, Iron Oak, or Iron and Oak. This is ship-to-ship combat by James M. Day, and again another game published by GMT Games. But this is ship-to-ship combat. This is tactical, ship-to-ship combat that when you have some of the engagements that are taking place on this board, you can pull them out and take them and put them on this board and play them out in a tactical setting. So I kind of like that aspect of, a strategic or operational view, and then boring down, hence my deep dives, boring down into a little bit more of a tactical level and dealing with the engagements at that scale. So that is Rebel Raiders on the High Seas from Mark McLaughlin, published by GMT Games. And last, and possibly the least, at least in size, is The Union Forever. This is a postcard game. Again, I've covered this before, so I'll put a link to that in the description. But this is a postcard game from Against the Odds magazine. They have a tendency to throw in a nice little postcard game into their magazine game offerings. So you have the board on one side, and you have your counters that you need to cut out, so you will have to deface this or destroy this as far as cutting out those counters. And then on the back side, you have the rules. That looked very small print there, doesn't it? But you have the rules, and of course there's your counters. And you can actually send this. You put a stamp on it, send it to a friend. Send a friend a game. How about that? So these are the rules. This is the game. And why is this a different perspective? Well, this is a very, this is one of the smaller footprint games that I have on the American Civil War. And it actually is kind of just like Rebel Raiders in some part is kind of focusing on the Anaconda Plan, which was to kind of strangle the South through blockades and controlling major riverways. This kind of has some of that same aspect here as well, so it kind of follows from the perspective of Rebel Raiders, but this is really focusing on the entire war at a very simplified and abstract level, and that is all represented here by the counters that you have there and the rules on the back there. So that's what I thought I'd stop with this one. Along my deep dive of different perspectives of the American Civil War. I have other games. I have a lot of American Civil War games, but these are the ones that kind of inspired me to pull off the shelf and take a quick look at. But I'd like to know what inspires you. What are your games of the American Civil War that provide a different perspective on the conflict, whether it's economic or social or political or military? What games do you find that bring something new to the table, or something different, or a different look at that conflict? Feel free to put that in the comments, and maybe put a little bit of reason why you think it has a unique perspective. What aspect of that game has a different look? And one thing I'm not trying to do with this deep dive is to look at mechanics, because there's been a lot of from Victory Games, the Civil War, to Mark Herman's For the People. There is there are different mechanics, card driven and hex encounter and how you deal with Civil War leaders. That's something that I decided not to cover in this deep dive. This is just purely different perspectives and not trying to get bogged down with just mechanics. Not saying that different mechanics aren't interesting and unique and novel and bring a lot to our gaming space. To the contrary, those are great, but that wasn't the focus of this list. This focus was really trying to what games do you think bring a kind of a different perspective, or looking at the American Civil War from a different angle. Anyway, love to see your comments, love to see a discussion started on that. Anyway, that's what I decided to do today, and during this American Civil War week, one of my many themed weeks. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Love to have your comments, and take care. Thanks for watching.